I'm 35 now. On paper, I guess you could say I've made it. I run my own consulting business, the kind where people pay me more for a week of my time than I used to make in a month waiting tables. I own my condo outright. I drive a car I actually wanted instead of whatever cheap beater would get me from A to B, and I have enough tucked away that I don't wake up at 3 a.m. wondering how I'll pay rent. But that's not the story I'm here to tell. That's just where I ended up. The story starts much earlier, in a house where I learned that everything, even love, had a price tag. When I was a kid, my parents made sure I knew one thing above all else. I was expensive. Not loved. Not wanted. Not valued. Expensive. Do you think money grows on trees? That was my mother's favorite line. She said it so often I could hear it, even when she wasn't in the room. My father's version was harsher. You'll pay us back someday. Every bite of food, every pair of shoes. Nothing in this world is free, boy. I must have been 6 or 7 the first time he said that. I remember because I was holding a bowl of cereal, soggy cornflakes, and lukewarm milk, and I asked if we could get the kind with the little marshmallows in it. His face twisted up, and he jabbed a finger at me. You eat what we buy? You think you deserve better? You'll work for it. One day, you'll understand what you owe us. That word, oh, became the shadow under everything. They kept a mental ledger, sometimes an actual one. My mom would wave a grocery receipt in my face and say, "Look at this. $45 just for you. Do you know how hard we work to keep you clothed and fed?" My dad would remind me of the mortgage. That roof over your head. Not free. That heat in winter? Not free. You'll remember all this when you're grown. When birthdays came around, there were gifts, but never without commentary. Don't get used to it, my mom would say, handing me a toy she'd already complained about being overpriced. You better appreciate what we spend. Even Christmas, a holiday that's supposed to be about joy, was a reminder. My father would stand by the tree like an accountant, grumbling about the cost of wrapping paper, electricity for the lights, the wastefulness of it all. I didn't grow up believing in Santa Claus. I grew up believing in debt. When I was a little older, around 10, I tried to argue back once. We were in the car, and my dad was on one of his rants about how ungrateful I was. I asked, "Didn't you choose to have me? Isn't it your job to take care of me?" I can still feel the silence that followed. The way the air changed, heavy and dangerous. He pulled the car over so fast the tires screeched, turned around in his seat, and glared at me with such rage I thought he might hit me. "Don't you ever say that again," he hissed. "We could have left you in a dumpster if we wanted. You think you're entitled to anything? We didn't have to keep you. Remember that." That was the day I learned not to talk back. It wasn't always screaming or threats. Sometimes it was quieter, more insidious, like when I'd come home with a good grade. Instead of "I'm proud of you," my mom would say, "Good. Maybe you'll make enough money someday to finally pay us back." Or when I needed new shoes for gym class, and my dad would sigh theatrically, mutter numbers under his breath, and then look at me and say, "That's another $40 added to your tab. You better not forget." I started keeping mental notes myself. I'd add up costs in my head, wonder how much the electric bill was, how much the food I ate every night added to my debt. I was a child doing accounting for my own existence. By the time I was a teenager, I didn't just feel like a burden. I felt like a liability. Like every breath I took was draining a balance sheet I'd never be able to pay back. There were no hugs unless it was in front of other people. No, "I love you," unless it was performative. I remember once when I was about 13, I asked my mom outright, "Do you love me?" She was folding laundry, didn't even look up. She just said, "Of course I do, but love doesn't pay bills." That was my answer. That was all I needed to know. I want to pause here because I know some people might read this and think, well, maybe they were struggling financially. Maybe they were stressed. They weren't. My dad had a steady job at a manufacturing plant. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor. We had a decent suburban house, 2 cars, vacations every couple of years. They bought themselves new furniture, nice clothes, gadgets. It wasn't about survival. It was about control. They wanted me to feel indebted. They wanted me to grow up believing that I owed them my loyalty, my obedience, my future. And for a long time, I did. By 16, I was already planning my escape. I got my first job bussing tables at a diner, and I didn't spend a single cent unless I had to. Every dollar went into a jar I hid in the back of my closet. My parents laughed at me when they found out. "What are you saving for? You think you're going to buy freedom? That's not how it works," my dad said, shaking his head. But I knew better. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had a goal. Get out. I wanted a life where I wasn't someone's ledger entry. Looking back now, with the clarity of adulthood, I can see the pattern for what it was: abuse disguised as parenting. A transactional kind of love that was never about me as a person, only about the cost of keeping me alive. At the time, though, all I knew was this: I was growing up with a debt I never chose. And one day, I was going to find a way to pay it. Not because I wanted to, but because it would be the only way to be free. At 16, I was bussing tables at a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner. I'd come home with my clothes reeking of fryer oil and a pocket of crumpled singles, and my mother would be waiting at the kitchen table with her calculator. "How much?" she'd ask without even looking up. 57 and change, I'd say, and I'd pour my tips onto the table. It wasn't always like that. At first it was for the house, then until we get through this month, and then it quietly became routine. She'd sweep the bills into a neat pile, count them twice, and slide me a single 10 back like I was a kid getting an allowance. "For your bus pass and soap," she'd say. "And don't forget you still owe us for the new cleats." Dad would chime in from the recliner without taking his eyes off the TV. Add 57 to his tab. They said tab, like we were in a bar, and I was drunk on their generosity. I started writing my own numbers down in a spiral notebook. Hours worked, tips earned, exact amounts handed over. Part of me hoped if I could reconcile it like an accountant, I could prove something. What? I didn't know. Maybe that I wasn't a black hole. Junior year, a guidance counselor pulled me out of English class to ask about colleges. She had a stack of brochures and this soft, practiced tone like everyone's mom on TV. "You've got the grades," she said. "Have you thought about state schools? With need-based aid, it could be very doable." I took the forms home like they were contraband. My mother thumbed through them, stopped on the page that asked for parental income and tax returns, and smiled without warmth. "Oh, finally," she said. "Time for you to start paying some of this back." "That's financial aid," I said, confused. "It's not." She tapped the paper. "They need our information, right? Then we'll be involved. You don't go anywhere until you've paid what you owe." My father read the FAFSA like it was a prank. "They want my W-2? Absolutely not." He tossed it onto the table so it skidded into my lap. "You want college? Pay cash. We're not signing anything that puts us on the hook." "That's not what it means," I said, voice small. "I just need your numbers." He leaned in, breath heavy with beer. "You need to understand that nothing in this house is free, including our signatures." I brought it back to the counselor and told her my parents wouldn't cooperate. She sighed, not surprised. "You can still go," she said gently. "Community college. Pay as you go." She wrote down the name of the campus a bus ride away and circled the office hours for admissions like she was handing me a compass. At home, the ledger got louder. When my track coach ordered team jackets, my father said, "You don't need one. Borrow." I worked an extra shift and bought mine anyway. When it arrived, there was a scene. He held it up like evidence. "How much?" he demanded. 40. Add 40 to his tab. He told my mother, and then he looked at me. "You keep digging the hole deeper, boy." Senior year, the walls moved in. Prom came up, and I told them I wasn't going. It wasn't some noble stand. I just couldn't stomach another debt. The week before the dance, my mother handed me a printed sheet. It had lines like food $XX, 000, clothes $XX, 000, utilities $XX, 000, and at the bottom, total, $134,782. There was even a section for miscellaneous, with a number that looked like she'd added it to make it hurt. "What is this?" My voice cracked. "A very conservative estimate," she said, tapping the paper. "We're not charging interest. We're not monsters." I stared at the number until it blurred. "I didn't ask to be born," I said before I could stop it. "Don't start," she snapped, then softened it with that tight smile. "We're being fair. Starting next month, you'll contribute $500 a month. Call it good faith on your debt. If you love us, you'll do it." 500 was more than I made some months. I took the sheet of paper to my room and pinned it to the corkboard like a trophy I didn't want. I lay awake that night listening to the house creak and imagined the number sitting on my chest, heavy as a safe. The actual break came a week after graduation. I'd just gotten home from a double shift, breakfast rush and lunch, and found my father sitting at the kitchen table with a pen and a manila folder. He slid a stapled packet toward me. What's this? I asked, already knowing. Agreement, he said. You sign, you live here. 500 due on the 1st of every month. Late fee of 50 after the 5th, and 10 per day after that. This way there's no confusion. I flipped through the pages. It looked like something he'd downloaded. Bullet points, signature lines, a blank for witness. He'd even highlighted sections. My hands started to shake. I can't afford this, I said. He leaned back, spreading his arms wide like he was magnanimous. Then find another place to live. We're not a charity. My mother hovered, arms crossed. Most kids pay rent, she said. You should be grateful we're giving you a discount. I thought about the jar hidden behind my shoeboxes. I thought about the bus routes I'd memorized to the community college. I thought about the counselor's neat handwriting and the circled office hours. I thought about waking up every day in this house with a spreadsheet for a mother and a debt collector for a father. Okay, I heard myself say, and my voice surprised me. It was steady, calm. Okay. I went to my room and pulled out 2 trash bags. I put my clothes in one and my shoes, notebooks, and the jar in the other. I slid my birth certificate and social security card into a folder and tucked it under my shirt like a secret. I took my track jacket off its hanger and put it on even though it was June and already 80 degrees. When I came back down, my father was smirking like I'd forgotten how this game worked. You sign first, he said, pushing the packet again. I'm not signing, I said, and I walked past him to the door. He stood so fast the chair skidded. Where do you think you're going? Out, I said, hand on the knob. You won't make it a week, he said, but there was an edge of panic under the contempt. I opened the door. The heat hit me like a wall. Behind me, my mother tried another angle. You'll come crawling back, she called. And when you do, the debt will be higher. I stepped onto the porch and realized I was breathing like I'd sprinted. The bags dug into my hands. The jar clinked with coins and small bills. I turned around once, not for them, but to take a mental picture of the house I'd grown up in. The peeling paint, the dead hanging plant my mother kept forgetting to water, the dent in the railing my father swore he'd fix. Then I walked. I went to Tyler's place first. He lived with his mom in a small 2-bedroom, and she took one look at my bags and said, "You can stay a week. Maybe 2. I slept on their couch and set my alarm for 4:30 a.m. so I could be at the diner by 5. I worked breakfast, then took the bus to the community college to stand in a line that wrapped around the building. I filled out forms. I paid for 6 credits with a money order that emptied my jar. I bought the used textbook that still smelled like someone else's highlighter. Nights, I mopped floors at a grocery store. The manager was a tired man who called everyone boss and showed me where they kept the cheap gloves. You want more hours? He asked after a week, and I said yes so fast my voice cracked. I always want more hours. I learned the sound of freedom, the quiet thunk of an automatic deposit hitting a checking account in the middle of the night, the click of a deadbolt on the room I rented next after Tyler's. $200 a month for a space barely wider than the mattress, cash only, no questions. I learned to stretch food, peanut butter on stale bread, rice with an egg and hot sauce, the way you can trick your stomach with water and a walk. I learned to be invisible and useful, say yes, show up, keep my head down, ask for more. My parents called. At first it was hourly, then daily, then weekly when I stopped answering. The voicemails were a gradient: concern, anger, contempt, accounting. Your debt is accruing, my mother said in one message, crisp like she was reading from a script. You should consider the interest on what you're putting us through. My father left shorter ones. Coward. Ungrateful. You'll see. I saved them, not to torture myself, but because some petty part of me wanted a record. I started keeping a different kind of ledger: hours worked, credits earned, dollars saved. It lived in the same spiral notebook as the old numbers, but these columns felt like a ladder instead of a cage. A guy at the grocery store named Carl, 40-something, permanently dusty with flour from stocking, told me to get my forklift certification. It's a day class, and then you're worth $1.50 more an hour, he said. You can buy a lot of rice and eggs with that. I took the class on a Saturday and passed. The first time I slid the forks under a pallet and lifted it smooth, I felt something click in my chest. Competence. It sounds small, but it was like finding a muscle I didn't know I had. Community college was a different kind of hard. I'd show up to class in my work shirt and sit in the back, eyes gritty, brain buzzing from coffee. A professor in an intro business class wrote assets versus liabilities on the board and joked about credit cards being a trap, and I had to look away because it felt too on the nose. After class, he stopped me in the hallway. "You're good at this," he said, like it was a simple observation. "Keep going." I went to the library and used the computers to read about compound interest and emergency funds. I opened a savings account at a credit union and set up an automatic transfer for $10 a week. It felt laughable. It also felt like rebellion. I went back to the house once. It was a Tuesday in September, and I had a 2-hour gap between classes. I wanted my yearbooks, a box of photos, the baseball glove my grandfather had given me. I called first, and my mother said, "You have 5 minutes." When I got there, she stood in the doorway like a bouncer. My father was inside, arms crossed. "You can take what you bought," he said. "Everything else was paid for by us. It's ours." I looked past him at the living room that hadn't changed since I was 12. The couch with the worn spot in the middle. The TV still too loud. The corkboard in my old room was bare. The printed debt sheet was gone. I didn't argue. I took my birth certificate and social security card from the folder I'd already stolen away, grabbed a photo of me on a bike from a side table, and left. On the porch, my mother said, "You think this is over? You think walking away clears the ledger?" I slid the photo into my backpack. "No," I said. "That's why I'm not coming back." I walked down the sidewalk and realized I didn't feel guilty. I felt tired mostly. And under that, a thin, steady line of resolve. Not anger. Not even defiance. Just a decision I kept making in 100 small ways. Don't go back. There wasn't a single cinematic moment where I made it. It was a year of stringing together small, unglamorous wins. A year of saying no to shifts with friends and yes to doubles. A year of buying a mattress off a guy on Craigslist and hauling it up 3 flights of stairs by myself, sweating through my shirt, laughing alone at the top because it felt ridiculous and somehow perfect. When people talk about leaving bad homes, they focus on the door closing, the slam. But the door isn't the end of it. The door is just the first quiet sound in a long new soundtrack. Mine was the echo of my own footsteps in a room that was mine, the beep of the microwave heating rice, the rustle of pages turning in a used textbook, the rumble of a forklift first thing in the morning, the low hum of possibility. I didn't know then what I'd become. I didn't have a 5-year plan or a vision board. I had a bus pass, a spiral notebook, a cheap phone with hateful voicemails, and a stubborn belief that if I kept choosing away from them, the math of my life would change. That was enough. It had to be. People like to romanticize the grind. You know, the cliches. Hustle culture, rise and grind. No pain, no gain. Let me tell you something. There was nothing romantic about the years after I walked out of my parents' house. It was exhaustion stacked on top of exhaustion, punctuated by small flashes of progress that I clung to like life rafts. But it was mine. Every dollar, every choice, every scar was mine. And that made all the difference. The first 2 years felt like living in fast forward. I was working 3 jobs at one point. Mornings at the diner, afternoons moving pallets in a warehouse, nights stocking at the grocery store. I'd sleep in 4-hour stretches, usually on a futon that squeaked whenever I turned over. My alarm clock was the cheapest one Walmart sold, shrill enough to wake the dead, and certainly loud enough to drag me upright when my body begged for more sleep. The diner was greasy, loud, and weirdly comforting. Customers would leave coins on sticky tables, and I'd sweep them into my apron, thinking about how even pennies mattered. Warehouse work was harder on my body. Long hours driving the forklift, sometimes unloading trucks by hand until my arms went numb. At the grocery store, I was invisible, just another night shift kid dragging boxes down fluorescent aisles while management slept at home. It would have been easy to feel like I was just spinning my wheels. But every 2 weeks, my notebook told a different story. I'd write down what came in, what went out, how much I'd tucked into savings. The numbers were laughably small at first, $22 here, $38 there, but the column was mine, not theirs. Not my parents' tab, not their ledger. Mine. College was slower. I couldn't afford more than a couple of classes per semester. I'd sit in lecture halls with kids who drove in on their parents' gas money, wearing clothes that weren't patched at the elbows. I used the campus printers instead of buying books whenever I could, or I'd check them out from the library and snap photos with my prepaid flip phone. One day, A kid next to me asked why I was always eating peanut butter sandwiches between classes. I told him it was cheap protein, and he laughed, saying his mom still packed his lunches. I smiled back, but inside, something twisted. I didn't hate him. I just felt like I was living in a different universe. Professors noticed me, though. One of them, Dr. Singh, pulled me aside after class and asked about my plans. I told him the truth, just trying to get through, trying to pay my way. He nodded and said, "That grit will matter more than you know. Don't stop." I didn't stop. The calls from my parents eventually slowed. By my second year out, they'd shifted from daily to occasional bursts. Whenever I saw their number flash on my phone, my stomach clenched. I'd let it ring. The voicemails were always the same. "You think ignoring us erases the debt? You'll regret this when you're older. Family takes care of each other. Why won't you take care of us?" I never deleted them. Not out of guilt, but because they were fuel. Every time I thought about quitting, about collapsing into sleep instead of writing another paper after a double shift, I'd replay one of those messages. I'd hear my father's sneer, my mother's cold tally, and I'd push harder. Their voices had trained me to measure my worth in numbers. Fine, I'd use that. But this time, the balance sheet was on my terms. By 21, I finally upgraded from the shoebox room to a one-bedroom apartment. It was tiny and smelled faintly of mildew, but it had a lock that clicked, and it was mine. I remember standing in the doorway that first night, holding a set of keys in my hand, and whispering, "You did this." The rent ate most of my paycheck, but I didn't care. I painted the walls off-white, dragged in a thrift store couch, and set my textbooks on a milk crate I pretended was a table. No one could walk in and claim they owned any of it. It was around then I started noticing something strange. When I wasn't exhausted, I was ambitious. Not in the shallow sense of wanting shiny things, but in this deep, gnawing way. I wanted to prove I could do more than survive. I wanted to prove I wasn't the liability they'd branded me as. I declared a major in business administration, partly because I'd always been fascinated by numbers, partly because I wanted to understand the very system my parents had used as a weapon against me. Assets, liabilities, overhead, investment. It was like learning the language of my oppressors so I could finally speak back. Money was still razor thin. I learned to stretch every dollar like it was elastic. I cooked rice in bulk and froze portions. I thrifted clothes until I could afford one decent suit from a clearance rack for interviews. And slowly, the universe started paying attention. At the warehouse, one of the managers noticed I was the guy who always said yes to extra shifts, who trained new hires without complaining. He offered me a lead position. The pay bump wasn't huge, but it was the first time anyone had said, "You've earned this," without strings attached. I took the extra cash and invested in a secondhand laptop. It was slow, but it let me type papers at home instead of camping at the library until close. That laptop became my lifeline. I wrote resumes for classmates on it. I researched side hustles on it. I even dabbled in freelancing online, doing data entry for strangers across the country who never knew I was working out of a mildew-smelling shoebox with peeling linoleum floors. Then came the moment that felt like the hinge of everything. An internship. Dr. Singh told me about a small consulting firm looking for part-time help. "You're sharp with numbers," he said. "Apply." I almost didn't. Imposter syndrome screamed in my head. "You're just the forklift kid. You don't belong in an office." But I put on my clearance rack suit, printed a resume on library paper, and sat through the interview sweating through my undershirt. A week later, they called. "We'd like to bring you on." The pay was barely more than the warehouse, but the work was different. I wasn't lifting boxes. I was running spreadsheets, analyzing small accounts, sitting in on client meetings where people in polished shoes discussed strategy. I watched everything. How they talked, how they dressed, how they carried themselves. I took notes like I was studying another language. The warehouse became part-time. Then it disappeared altogether. The diner shift stopped. The grocery store faded into memory. By 24, I was working full-time at the consulting firm, finishing my degree at night, and for the first time, sleeping more than 4 hours at a stretch. My parents didn't know any of this. They still thought of me as the runaway who owed them 6 figures and respect. Once, my mother sent a handwritten letter, pages of guilt dressed as love. It ended with, "We just want to know when you'll start paying us back." I folded it neatly, slid it into a drawer, and wrote nothing in return. But I saved it. Like the voicemails. like the spreadsheet of their debt. Because even then, while I was climbing, while I was building, I knew. One day, I would answer their question. Not with words, not with apologies, not with endless servitude. I would pay the debt, every cent, on my terms, and then I would be free. Graduating felt anticlimactic. There was no family in the bleachers, no proud parents snapping photos. Just me in a stiff rental gown, walking across a stage to shake a stranger's hand while my classmates' families cheered around me. But when they called my name and I felt the diploma folder slide into my palm, I gripped it like a weapon. It wasn't paper. It was proof. Proof that the ledger wasn't theirs anymore. I celebrated by sitting alone in my apartment with a six-pack of cheap beer and takeout fried rice. It was perfect. The consulting firm kept me on full-time. My responsibilities grew, first small accounts, then mid-sized ones. I found I had a knack for seeing patterns in numbers, for spotting inefficiencies and shaving waste. Clients liked me because I could explain complex problems without making them feel stupid. I was 26 when I got my first real raise. Not a 50-cent bump like the warehouse days. A real raise, thousands a year. I stood in the HR office nodding politely, but inside I was on fire. On my way home, I stopped at the credit union and increased my automatic savings transfer. That night, I pulled out my old spiral notebook, the one where I used to track every penny. I flipped through the pages, grease-stained, smudged, full of scribbled calculations. It felt like holding my younger self in my hands. Then, carefully, I started a new section. At the top, I wrote, Future Ledger. This time, the numbers worked for me. By my late 20s, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I moved into a condo, small, but modern, with light that poured through the windows in the morning. I bought furniture that wasn't secondhand. I stocked a fridge that didn't reek of mildew. And the best part? Every single thing in that place was paid for by me. No guilt attached. No tab. Still, I didn't live flashy. My coworkers drove leased cars and posted photos from expensive vacations. I kept driving my beat-up Corolla until it finally died, then bought a used sedan in cash. I didn't care about appearances. What I cared about was security. I built an emergency fund. I maxed out my retirement accounts. I invested conservatively but steadily. Because in the back of my mind, there was always that one-line item I hadn't crossed off. The debt. It started as a thought experiment. One night, I dug through an old box I'd carried with me since leaving home. Inside were scraps of paper, receipts my mother had waved in my face, school forms with fees scribbled on them, that ridiculous typed ledger she'd once handed me. I spread them on the table like puzzle pieces. How much did it actually cost to raise me? I pulled up government statistics, average cost of raising a child reports. I read studies, cross-referenced inflation tables, and adjusted for the years I'd been alive. My father's voice echoed in my head. Every bite of food, every roof over your head. You'll pay us back someday. Fine. Let's calculate it. I worked methodically. Food, clothing, healthcare, schooling, extracurriculars, utilities, transportation, even miscellaneous. I cross-checked everything against public data from the late 80s through early 2000s. If I couldn't find exact numbers, I used conservative estimates. Line by line, column by column, I built the ledger. This time, not from their accusations, but from data. Cold, clinical, indisputable. The total? Just under $148,000. I stared at the number for a long time. It wasn't far off from the $134,000 my mother had charged me years earlier. Maybe she'd looked up the same studies. Or maybe it was just the universal script abusive parents recite. Either way, I finally had something tangible. From that point forward, it became a plan. I set up a dedicated investment account labeled Ledger. Every month, I funneled money into it alongside my retirement savings. I treated it like any other financial goal, measurable, trackable, inevitable. The account grew. My career advanced. By 30, I was making more money than I ever dreamed possible during those ramen and rice years. I'd switched firms twice, each time trading loyalty for opportunity. The kid who once scrubbed grease off diner plates was now consulting for companies pulling in millions. I traveled, too. Not extravagantly, but meaningfully. A weekend in Paris with friends. A solo hike in Patagonia. Standing in those places, breathing air my parents had never breathed, I realized just how small their world had been. They'd told me I was trapped. They'd told me I owed them everything. And here I was, standing at the other end of the earth, proving them wrong with every step. But still, the ledger account grew quietly in the background, untouched, waiting. They tried reaching out again when I turned 31. My mother sent an email with the subject line, "We miss you. Let's reconnect." The body was syrupy sweet, talking about family bonds and how time heals wounds. The last line, though, gave it away. "We're not getting any younger. We could use a little help with expenses." There it was. Always the transaction. Always the demand dressed as love. I didn't reply, but I added the email to the growing folder titled Receipts. By 33, the ledger account hit the number. The full cost of raising me, adjusted for inflation, sitting there in black and white. I didn't send it right away. Not yet. I let it sit for a year, compounding, because I wanted the final figure to be undeniable. I wanted it neat. I wanted it perfect. In that year, something shifted in me. The anger dulled. The need for vengeance softened into something quieter, sharper. It wasn't about punishing them anymore. It was about balance. Closing the loop. Ending the story they'd been writing for me since childhood. I remember the night I decided it was time. I poured myself a glass of scotch, Real Scotch, not the bottom-shelf whiskey I used to choke down in my 20s, and sat at my desk. I opened the ledger account. I double-checked the total. $151,740. 92. I logged into my bank and set up a transfer. Their joint account information was still saved from years ago, from when they used to demand money while I lived under their roof. In the memo line, I typed 2 words, "debt repaid." My finger hovered over the mouse for a moment, not out of doubt, but out of reverence. This was it. The final act. Click. The money left my account. Then, calmly, I opened my phone. I blocked their numbers. I blocked their emails. I blocked them on every social media platform I could think of. I deleted old voicemails, old letters, old reminders. I closed the folder labeled Receipts and dragged it to an external drive, not out of spite, but out of finality. When it was done, I sat back in my chair. The silence in my condo felt different. Not empty, not lonely, clean. For the first time in my life, I didn't owe them anything. Not money, not love, not loyalty, nothing. The money hit their account on a Tuesday morning. I know because the transfer confirmation arrived in my email at 9:14 a.m. I deleted it as soon as I saw it. By then, the deed was already done. I didn't expect peace right away. I knew my parents. I knew they'd rage, scramble, try to twist it. But I underestimated just how fast they'd respond. By noon, my phone lit up with missed calls. My father first, 5 in a row, then 3 voicemails. Then my mother, alternating between texts and emails. The notifications stacked up so fast my screen froze. I didn't open a single one. That night, though, curiosity got the better of me. I logged into my email, not my main one, but the backup I still had access to, and read a handful of her messages. The first was sugar-coated. "We saw the transfer. That was very thoughtful, but you didn't need to do that. Family isn't about money, it's about love. Why don't you come over so we can talk?" Then came the cracks. "This amount is insulting. Do you have any idea how much more it cost to raise you? You've barely scratched the surface." By the third, the mask was gone entirely. "You think you can wash your hands of us with some money? That debt never goes away. Blood doesn't work like that. You will always owe us." I closed the browser. My pulse didn't even spike. For once, their words slid right off me. The voicemails were worse. I let one play on speaker while I made dinner. My father's voice filled the room, ragged with fury. "You smug little bastard. You think this makes us even? You think this makes you better than us? You'll come crawling back when your fancy job dries up. You'll see how far your precious independence gets you." I stirred my pasta and let him rant in the background. It sounded like an old recording, a greatest hits album of every threat and sneer I'd grown up with. Nothing new, just louder. I hit delete and sat down to eat. The sauce was a little too salty, but it was still the best meal I'd ever had. Over the next week, the noise escalated. My mother sent a letter by certified mail. She'd itemized more expenses on lined notebook paper, written in the same neat, looping script she'd once used for grocery lists. Interest on loans we could have taken but didn't. Emotional damages for your ingratitude. Lost wages from stress you caused. At the bottom, revised total, $489,250. She'd even underlined it twice, like a teacher correcting a child's math homework. I laughed out loud when I saw it. Not bitterly, not cruelly, just a clean, full laugh that shook something loose in my chest. I folded the letter once, slid it into a folder, and put it away. I didn't need to reply. The transfer had already spoken for me. Friends asked why I didn't change my number sooner, why I didn't cut them off years before. The truth is, for a long time I wanted to hear the noise. I wanted proof they were still who I remembered, proof that I wasn't crazy. But now I wanted silence. So I went down the list: phone carrier, email provider, social media settings, and locked every door. Their calls went straight to nowhere. Their emails bounced. Their letters stacked up unopened until I dropped them in the shredder like junk mail. With each click, each block, the volume in my head turned down. Of course, they tried other ways. My aunt called one evening, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Her tone was heavy with obligation. "Your mother's upset," she said. "She doesn't understand why you'd cut her off after everything she's done for you." I let the silence stretch until she added, "She showed me the transfer. She says it was a cruel joke." "It wasn't a joke," I said simply. "Then what was it?" "Closure." She sighed. "Families aren't meant to be closed off like that. Families aren't supposed to treat kids like invoices," I replied. "She can tell whatever story she wants. I'm done." After that, the extended family chatter faded too. Either they realized I wouldn't budge, or my parents shifted the narrative to save face. Either way, the calls stopped. I thought maybe I'd feel guilt. Maybe one night I'd wake up sweating, haunted by the idea that I'd abandoned them. But the truth? I slept better than ever. For decades, I carried their ledger in my head like a chain. Every decision, every purchase, every bite of food, I felt their eyes on me, calculating. That weight was gone now. I'd balanced the books, literally. There was nothing left for them to hold over me. Even my nightmares changed. I used to dream of being back in that house, trapped in my old room, listening to them mutter about bills. Now, when the dreams came, I was walking out the front door again, but this time with sunlight on my face, not fear. I kept the transfer receipt, though. One page, neat and impersonal. Amount, $151,740. 92. Memo, debt repaid. I framed it, not to gloat, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. I had given them exactly what they demanded. No more, no less. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd spent my entire childhood reducing love to a ledger. And in the end, that ledger was the knife I used to cut myself free. The silence stretched. A month passed, then 2, then 6. I half expected them to show up at my door, but they never did. Pride, maybe, or fear, or maybe they finally realized there was nothing left to squeeze. And me? I kept living. My business grew. I hired staff. I traveled more. I started running in the mornings, long, slow jogs that cleared the cobwebs. Sometimes, halfway through, I'd realize I was smiling for no reason at all. Just smiling because the air was mine, the steps were mine, the life was mine. People sometimes ask me if I hate them. The answer is no. Hatred takes energy. Hatred is still a kind of tether. What I feel now is nothing. They don't get to live rent-free in my head anymore. They asked me for a transaction. I gave them one. End of story. What came after wasn't hatred. It wasn't even forgiveness. It was freedom. Time didn't sprint after the transfer. It exhaled. The first month felt like standing in a room where a loud machine had finally been switched off. You don't realize how much you were shouting to be heard until the silence lands and your own voice doesn't have to push anymore. One day I woke up and noticed I'd slept straight through the night. Then it happened again and again. Routine, the opposite of crisis, settled in. My life got smaller and better in the right ways. The condo became a home. Bookshelves I built myself, a couch that didn't squeak, a plant I kept alive on purpose. I turned the spare room into an office with 2 monitors and a whiteboard that I left smudged because I liked the evidence of problems solved. The consulting work that used to terrify me became muscle memory. The kid who once thought assets versus liabilities was a threat now used those words to help clients breathe easier. I paid invoices on time because late fees had been someone else's favorite weapon. No surprise charges. No miscellaneous lines. No moving goalposts. My policies were boring and honest. People entered my life who didn't care about the myth of me. There was Sam, a designer I hired on a trial contract who ended up becoming my second full-time employee. During our first one-on-one, I told him we did raises on a schedule and profit sharing was formulaic. It's not personal, I said. He grinned. That's exactly why I want it. There was Maya from the community college, now an intern, who asked for feedback like it was coffee. There were clients who started our meetings with, "Here's what we can afford," and meant it. I picked up running again, longer distances on quiet streets at dawn. At first I ran like I was being chased. After a while I ran like I was going somewhere. My thoughts rearranged themselves into cleaner lines. The old phrases sometimes floated up, "You owe us. You'll pay someday." I'd notice them and keep running until they lost their grip. They became like graffiti on a building I no longer lived in. The family orbit didn't pull me in anymore, but it still existed. One Saturday at the farmer's market, Mrs. Kent, the neighbor who used to bring us over-baked cookies shaped like stars, tapped my arm. "Haven't seen you in ages," she said, squinting in the sun. I could see the question forming behind her eyes, the curiosity thrumming in small towns forever. "So what happened?" Before she could ask, she said, "Your mother mentioned you sent money, then disappeared. That must have been hard." I shrugged. It was simple. She nodded like she understood, and then bought peaches from the next stand. The world didn't tilt. I walked away with a bag of tomatoes and the odd relief of not having to explain my own life. The past tried to stage a comeback in different costumes. An envelope with my parents' return address showed up around Thanksgiving. I held it, felt the weight of it, and dropped it into the shredder still sealed. "That's wasteful," the old ledger voice tried to say, and then a louder, newer voice answered, "No, that's a boundary." I roasted a chicken that night, turned on a playlist that swung between 90s R&B and instrumental jazz, and ate at my table with a cheap candle burning. Halfway through, I realized I wasn't doing self-care. I was just living. Holidays used to be loud for the wrong reasons. Now I made them quiet for the right ones. Friends started a tradition called Orphan's Dinner for anyone who didn't want or couldn't handle family gatherings. We cooked too much and sent everyone home with containers. The first year, someone asked, "Do you miss them?" I took a sip of wine and told the truth. Sometimes I miss the idea of parents. The postcard version, but not the people. No one tried to correct me. No one said, "But they're family." Someone passed the mashed potatoes without a sermon. That felt like a miracle. Work gave me chances to reverse patterns I'd memorized in pain. A new hire, 19 and exhausted, asked me quietly if he could delay paperwork for his onboarding because his parents wouldn't give him their tax info and he needed to figure out his FAFSA. The word hit me like a bell. I remembered my father refusing to share his W-2 while lecturing me about gratitude. I remembered the counselor's neat handwriting. I pulled up the financial aid page and walked him through options, dependency overrides, documentation you can gather, who to talk to at the aid office. "You're not the first kid whose parents use paperwork as a choke chain," I said carefully. "There's a path." He nodded, blinking too fast. "Thank you." It wasn't charity. It was a map I wish someone had handed me sooner. Dating was normal, which still surprises me. On a third date with Eva, over dumplings and tea, she asked about my family. I didn't flinch. "Estranged," I said. I paid them back what they said I owed and cut contact. She raised an eyebrow. "Clean." I laughed. "That's the point." We lasted 8 months. When it ended, it wasn't because of the past. It ended the way things sometimes do. Two good people going in different directions. I felt the sadness I was supposed to feel, and then it lifted like sunrise. No car crashes. No accusations. No spreadsheets. If you're waiting for a twist where I get dragged back in, it doesn't exist. The closest thing was a voicemail from an unknown number 2 years after the transfer. I don't pick up unknowns, but I listened once it landed. It was my aunt again. "Your father's health isn't great," she said. "Your mother says she hasn't heard from you. She's embarrassed, but she asked me to call. They're struggling." I stood at my kitchen counter while the dishwasher hummed. The word "struggling" felt like a code I'd outgrown. I saved the voicemail in case I needed dates someday. Then I texted my aunt. "I hope he gets the care he needs. I am not available for contact." She sent a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. The sky didn't crack open. My therapist, yes, I finally stopped pretending I could excavate everything alone, asked me, "What do you want your life to be organized around?" It was a boring question that landed like a clean sheet on a bed. "Not debt," I said. "Not obligation. Not revenge, even. Just the stuff I chose." She smiled. "Write that on your whiteboard." I did, in black marker. Every time I erased project plans or timelines, I left that line untouched, an anchor sentence in a sea of moving parts. Some things I used to count, I stopped counting. Hours worked just to prove I could. Miles run just to outpace a feeling. Number of days since the last contact. I didn't need the scoreboard anymore. Some things I counted more. Staff raises, days the office was closed because rest beats burnout. The number of times I told someone, "You did a good job," with no asterisk, no joke, no invoice. The condo that felt big when it was empty filled up on purpose. Friends used my extra key. A neighbor fed my plant when I traveled. A kid I mentored sent me a photo of his acceptance letter with all caps "Thank YOUS" that made me laugh out loud. I bought a new car not because the old one died, but because I wanted a comfortable seat on long drives. I visited places I'd circled in atlases in middle school, places the kid at the diner once thought belonged to other people. I took a train along the coast and watched towns blur by like lines I wasn't stuck inside anymore. Every now and then, a memory surfaced with surprising gentleness. Birthday cake in our old kitchen. The way winter light fell on the driveway when I shoveled before school. My dad teaching me how to change a tire in the garage. Anger holstered for once because there was a task to complete. I didn't wrestle those memories into one category. Not all of it was poison. Some of it was just life, complicated and real. I let it pass through. It didn't rewrite anything. Truthfully, the most triumphant moments didn't look triumphant from the outside. They were small. They were me grocery shopping without hearing anyone add prices in my head. Me buying a gift for a friend and not calculating what the gift demanded in return. Me taking a sick day without inventing a reason to justify it to an invisible jury. Me picking up the phone when it said unknown and hanging up without listening because I didn't know curiosity either. If there's a theme to the years after, it's this: peace is maintenance. It's not a grand gesture. It's 100 small, boring choices that keep the door closed and the windows open. It's buying good sheets. It's saving for the future because you want one. It's helping others untangle from ledgers because you can, not because you must. It's trusting that you don't need a witness to make your life real. Sometimes I still take out the framed transfer receipt, not to gloat, but to check my own story against something I can touch. Amount: $151,740. 92. Memo: debt repaid. It's not art. It's not even pretty. But it's accurate. It's the period I put at the end of the sentence they started. And when I put it back on the shelf, the room is quiet in the way I used to think belonged to other people. The quiet isn't empty. It's full of the things I chose. It's the sound of a ledger closed and a life opened. When I was a kid, my parents had a favorite line: "You'll pay us back someday." They said it when I asked for new shoes. They said it when I ate seconds at dinner. They said it when I dared to imagine a future that wasn't theirs. For a long time, I thought they were right. That every breath I took ran up a tab I could never clear. That my existence was a negative balance I'd spend my whole life trying to reconcile. And for years, it felt true. But here's what I've learned. On the other side of all of it, sometimes the only way to win the game is to play it by their rules, then walk off the field entirely. The day I hit send on that transfer, I closed a circle that had been choking me since childhood. And in the years since, I've realized something even more important. The money wasn't the real revenge. The real revenge was silence. Distance. A life lived without their ledger hanging over it. I gave them exactly what they demanded: the cost of raising a child, down to the cent. I itemized it, calculated it, adjusted it for inflation, and wired it to their account with a neat little bow. Debt repaid. And then I left. That was the part they never saw coming. You know what's wild? They can't even say I abandoned them anymore. I didn't walk away owing them. I didn't leave with unfinished business. I didn't run because I couldn't face them. I paid. Cleanly. Fully. Public data, official numbers, confirmed transfer receipt. It's probably the most honest transaction I've ever made in my life. So when they tell whatever story they're spinning now, about their ungrateful son, about the betrayal, about how I owe them still, I know the truth. And the truth is neat, simple, undeniable. They wanted a debt. I settled it. That's it. Here's what no one tells you about freedom. It's quiet. It's not fireworks or applause or a montage with a swelling soundtrack. It's walking into your kitchen and realizing you're not bracing for someone to itemize the groceries. It's buying a winter coat without imagining an interest rate attached. It's waking up on your birthday and knowing there won't be guilt hidden in wrapping paper. Freedom is boring in the best way possible. Sometimes I think about the kid I was, the one hunched over a bowl of soggy cornflakes, nodding while his father reminded him he'd have to pay for every bite someday. I wish I could put my arm around him. I'd tell him, they're wrong. You don't owe them love. You don't owe them gratitude. You don't owe them your life. One day, you'll give them the exact number they've been demanding, and then you'll give yourself the thing they never offered, peace. I can't go back and tell him that, but I can live it now, and maybe that's enough. The framed receipt still sits on my shelf. Not because I need to look at it often, I don't. Most days I forget it's even there. But every now and then, when the past creeps back around the edges, I glance at it and remember, that was the last payment I'll ever make for simply existing. After that, everything is mine. Some people will say, but they're still your parents. And I'll say, exactly. They're my parents, not my owners, not my creditors. Just two people who made a choice to have a child and then tried to weaponize that choice against him. Others will say, don't you feel guilty cutting them off? And I'll say, no, guilt is what they taught me. Peace is what I taught myself. And a few will say, would you ever go back? And I'll say, no, because the ledger is closed. I don't reopen closed books. It took me more than 3 decades to get here, to climb out of their balance sheet, to stop believing I was a liability and start believing I was an asset, to myself, to the life I built, to the people I choose to keep close. But here I am, 35, self-made, independent, living in a home where the only debt I carry is the mortgage I voluntarily took on, and even that's just math, not chains. Surrounded by friends who never once asked me to prove my worth in dollars. Running a business where you're valuable doesn't mean you owe me. And most of all, free. If there's one message I'd carve into stone for anyone who grew up like me, it's this. Love is not a transaction. Parenting is not a loan. Existing is not a debt. If someone tries to convince you otherwise, you don't have to argue. You don't have to scream. You don't even have to forgive. You can pay them back exactly what they asked for, literally, metaphorically, whatever makes sense for you. And then you can walk away. Because sometimes the most satisfying closure isn't revenge in flames. It's a door closing softly, permanently, with you on the other side breathing freely. When I was 6 years old, my father leaned across the table and told me I'd owe them for every bite of food I ate. 30 years later, I wired him the cost of every bite. And now, when I sit down at my own table, fork in hand, plate in front of me, I eat in silence. And it tastes like freedom.